Hi, I'm Lena. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my September wrap-up. I have a much bigger pile of books than usual. I think 50% I have physically and the other ones I have digitally. So I read 17 books in September, which is way more than my average. I think my average is around 10. So I have some speculative fiction, some fantasy. I even have a mystery thriller. I have quite a bit of non-fiction, some literary fiction and something that is, I guess, modern classic literary fiction. If you have been watching my videos this month, then you know that I kind of got out of my comfort zone and read some recommendations by other people. Lots of these books are not books that I would necessarily pick up, which is lots of fun and might be a little bit difficult to talk about, but because I've discussed all of these books before, today's video will just be a bit of an overview where I quickly mention the book I read, the rating I gave them, and very shortly and concisely, hopefully, my thoughts. So I thought we could start with maybe the most difficult category, which is speculative fiction and fantasy. So the first one I read is a part of a duology, and this is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Sue Lynn Tan. This is a YA fantasy in which we follow a teen who lives in the Celestial Kingdom, which is the fantasy world that this duology is set in. Her mother has hidden her existence. At some point she needs to leave the moon and make her way in the rest of the Celestial Kingdom. This book was great because of its fast pacing, a lot of different locations, a lot of different people. I love the side characters as well in this book. The fantasy setting was fascinating, atmospheric and quite unique, especially for a YA fantasy. I really liked Celestial Kingdom, so I'm looking forward to reading the second one. I wasn't always the biggest fan of the scenes that have a lot of high stakes in this book, but that's very much a me thing. I just don't really enjoy that. There were some action-packed scenes in here that kind of lost me. Overall, I gave this a 4.5 star. Really excited for the next one. And I would recommend this if you love fast pacing, if you love a good plot, and if you are a sucker for great side characters. Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson is, I think, a contemporary fantasy. I think it is speculative fiction, if you would categorize it. This is about a friendship, about two women who have been out of touch for quite a while. They met when they were teenagers and they had a big class difference between them, which kind of exploded their friendship. One of the women asks the other one for a favor, and the favor is that she needs help with children that combust. They catch fire, but it doesn't hurt them. I guess parts of it kind of reminded me of some Marvel superhero stuff, but it's not all written in that way, but it's kind of what you could imagine that happens to these children. This book was weird, it was emotional, it was unexpected, and I was unexpectedly involved in these children. I thought the children were written really well, very layered. I really felt like I got to know them as much as I got to know the adult characters. The dialogue and the writing weren't really my super favorites. I don't think I'm very interested in reading more by the author. The dialogue felt a bit unnatural, a bit cringy at parts, but the story itself and the emotional heaviness of the book, I did not expect to get that from this, but I definitely got it. And I gave this book 4 stars. Getting back to YA fantasy, I read the first one in the series again, Every Heart a Dawe by Seanan McGuire. This has a bit of a school setting, but it's a school that takes care, a boarding school that takes care of children who have gone through magical doors to different worlds, stayed there for a while and have gone back to our normal contemporary world where they have trouble settling back in, and they have a lot of difficulty because they want to get back to the world, to the magical world. These magical worlds have different kind of names. They are categorized differently, like you have good worlds and evil worlds, rational worlds and weird worlds. I know I'm not saying the right words. You can really see that this is a first book in a series where you know that that whole concept is going to be explored so much more, and I know that there are a lot of books in the series and I think every book follows a different character. So I like the main character from the first book, but I did really feel like it had a bit of a first book syndrome. Is not really a thing. I don't think the story has finished. I very much dipped my toe into this and I would like to see more, but it didn't really feel like the book was standing on its own. What surprised me is that this book is really dark and really gory, and it had some mystery as well, which I really loved. As soon as the mystery took off halfway through this book, I got super invested and I decided I wanted to read the rest of the series because I think the author has such a wild, amazing imagination, and I can only imagine what happens when we get to know more worlds, more doors. The writing is super vague. It's very ambiguous, atmospheric, and I can see how that is not for everyone. I think in a fantasy I do like more straightforward writing, but I also really got along with this somehow, surprisingly. So I'm excited for the next book in the series, which I will read whenever I have the chance to. This book was a 3.75 for me, so even though I'm very excited, I'm more excited for the series, then I would say this book in itself blew my mind. Another speculative literary fiction is Creatures of Passage by Morowa Yejidé. This is a Toni Morrison inspired book, so of course that was a great start for me. It reminded me a little bit of Toni Morrison's writing, so if you've read Toni Morrison, you can kind of see what you can expect from this writing. A lot of different POVs, lots of vague POVs, lots of characters where you wonder why they matter to the story until you get to know the story more. I really like the main character. She's a middle-aged woman, she's a taxi driver, and she has a dead white girl in her trunk. Not someone she killed herself, but the ghost of the dead white girl in her trunk. She drives people around and has conversations with them. We get to know these people. Quite a few years ago, she lost her twin brother. The grief that she is experiencing from that still is woven throughout this book. And then we have a different theme that I still don't really know how to place. So this book is about family, it's about found family, it's about how that all weaves together and how tragic and abusive storylines weave together within the characters. It's a hard book to talk about because it's very vague when it comes to writing and when it comes to character exploration, and it is just heart punching and disgusting at other points. I really love the magical or the speculative part of this book where the ghosts are very much real and are something that you can interact with, something that connects to yourself, to your life. Their role is really important for the plot as well, so they are as much important characters as our living characters are. It really challenges the line between real and imagination, especially if you are a reader who can be a bit skeptical of those themes like me. It really challenged me to accept what was happening in the book. My only criticism of this book is I think that I needed more of the main character, that I wanted her to be more of the center of the story, which made this book feel chaotic to me at parts. So therefore I think I gave it a 3.5 star or like a 3.75. It's not really my favorite, but I would love to read more by the author. Having read a lot of first books in the series, I also read a final book in the series, and that is Pages and Go, The Last Bookwanderer. This is the last book in the middle grade series by Anna James. I'm really sad that it's over, but I had a wonderful time reading this. This is about a group of kids who bookwander through books, meaning that they get to be a part of the stories that they read. We met a lot of characters throughout the series, and in this book all the characters come together to solve the final puzzle, and I thought it was really well done. I thought it was really admirable how every character kind of got their place and none of them were neglected in a way, which I think is so hard to do, and I think Anna James did a perfect job. In this book we get to know legends and myth. There were a lot of characters. We had Merlin, we had Loki, both of which I find fascinating characters, so I really loved that that was part of this book. I gave it a 5 stars. I think I've given most of Pages and Go 5 star because it's just my favorite middle grade series. If you've been doubting whether or not you want to continue with the series, here is me telling you that you should. I read 2 mystery/crime books, which is not like me at all, but I had quite a good time reading these, although they did confirm to me that this is not my genre. First one I read is a very popular one, and that is Finlay, Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. This is again the first in a series that I will not continue though, because I gave this a 3.5 star. We follow our main character, Finlay Donovan, who is a crime writer, and after her divorce she gets into financial difficulty and she needs to find a way to financially survive. When she has a meeting with her editor, someone overhears her talking about crime and murder, so she thinks she is a hit woman and she tries to hire her. From there on, everything kind of explodes and Finlay gets involved in things she really does not want to get involved in. I thought this book had such a perfect plot. It was perfectly paced, perfectly chosen which events to put in, which to leave out. Everything was perfect about this reading experience when it came to plot. I also really liked Finlay Donovan, not in the beginning, but she developed well. Where this book kind of lacked for me were the side characters and their motivations, which were a bit questionable, didn't really have a lot of reason to them. I know that there is one character that is connected to a romance. I really love that. I know that that character is going to play a bigger role in the later series, and I can see how that will work. Some of the characters that I felt were really part of the first book I just didn't find interesting, and I just didn't feel like their actions really match their motivations. So I think that is where the book was quite disappointing to me. I do think the writing, again with the plot, the writing was perfect. It worked so well. I had a really fun time listening to it. I will not continue this series because I've heard bad things about it, but if she writes a standalone, I'm very much interested in reading that. The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz was the first really thriller book I read in a long time. And even though thriller is definitely not my genre, I thought this was a really good one. So we follow a not so successful writer who is surprisingly invited to a writing retreat that is hosted by a very famous and successful author. When she comes there, it's like a very gothic mansion. She meets other female writers and they just do their thing. They start writing and then slowly things start to seem off. The host draws a lot of control towards herself and we start to suspect her more and more of having odd intentions. And while the first half of this book felt a bit slow to me, it felt very much like I was reading contemporary fiction, which is fine by me, but then it exploded in a way that was so strange and weird and unbelievable, but also enjoyable. I feel like a thriller can be both, but again, not the best person to review it. And while that tension was so insane to me, I felt it very strongly. I think typical thriller readers will really love this, and I ended up giving this a low 4 stars. I think if the genre was really for me, this would have been a 5-star read, but again, not really my vibe. Over to the literary fiction, and I'm gonna start with maybe one of the books that was most impactful to me, and that is Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. We are set in contemporary Oakland and we follow the 17-year-old Kiara who tries to take care of her brother and her neighbor, who is a young boy. Her support system has disappeared and she tries to find out how to survive financially. She's going out of her way to find jobs, but no one is hiring her. She left school, I think, before she graduated, and she doesn't really have a resume, so she has a really hard time being able to keep up with the rent and buy food, and at some point she's going to do whatever she needs to do to survive. This is a very hard-hitting coming of age in a situation where coming of age isn't really an option. Once her brother stops taking care of her, she is an adult right away in a way that she has to provide for herself, but of course not in a way that she is mentally prepared for everything that comes with that. It is about love, about found family. It reflects the disruptive reality of our current day society, about how a lot of people fall through the cracks and how our justice system does not deliver. How we forget certain people just because we can. The writing in this book was gorgeous, was beautiful. At some point the plot really starts to take off and it goes so fast and it's unputdownable. At some point, which I thought was a really intense reading experience, almost too intense for me personally, because it really affected me that I just wanted to keep on reading, even though reading this book did not make me feel good. It brought me in a bad mood, which, putting it away, felt like a privilege in a way of someone who is not able to do that in the world that she is in. I gave this book a 4.5 star. It wasn't quite a 5-star because the pacing of the plot didn't super work for me in the beginning, but this is definitely a book I would highly recommend if you read literary fiction. Another literary fiction I would definitely recommend is What Willow Says by Lynn Buckle. We follow a grandmother and a granddaughter. The grandmother is the narrator. She's quite a young grandmother, and we follow her as she tries to take care of her granddaughter who is deaf. The book feels very poetic. It is an exploration of how you experience the world in different ways, how people with certain disabilities experience the world, how her granddaughter perceives nature and trees and other people, and how she prefers for herself to interact with her granddaughter. She way more focuses on their relationship than on being focused on what her granddaughter needs to interact with the rest of the world, which is often mentioned that is not something maybe that is bothering her granddaughter a lot, but her granddaughter is still very young, so it will bother her in the future. It is focused on the relationship that she has with her granddaughter and that her granddaughter could possibly have with the world. I thought it was really well done how ableism wove into that, how love and family wove into that, and how a lot of things were kept unsaid. It explores language in different ways, both English and Irish, but also sign language versus hearing language. And this was again a 4.5 for me. I thought it was a really beautiful experience. I can't say that I understood every single sentence in this book, but that's okay. I think I could read it again and experience it again. This was such a unique book and such a beautiful way to describe disability. I seem to have a lot of 4.5 this month, which is a beautiful thing. But another 4.5 was Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a historical fiction written in the 80s but set in the 50s. We follow our main character, who is a butler who used to work in this big house with a big staff with very, I said it in the vlog as well, but Downton Abbey vibes. And then his employer dies and he gets a new employer who is more of a modern American, who is looking for the old-fashioned English vibes and really wants him to be the old-fashioned butler. But when his employer goes away to travel, he suggests that the butler, our main character, also travels and he's allowed to take his car. And when we follow follow him on his travels. He writes kind of a diary and tells him very beautiful and emotional parts of his life, while he is also being confronted in the current day with the modern world. The writing in this book is so genius, it is so layered, so many things go unsaid, but the most important things you can kind of see in between the lines, and I love that so much. It's so touching and emotional to be with a person who doesn't really understand its world but thrives in a part of history. I can't wait to read more by this author, and I would highly recommend this. If you like historical fiction. The only fiction that wasn't a novel that I read is a play. Norma Jean Baker of Troy by Anne Carson. This is a play that's only 60 pages long, and we follow Norma Jean Baker, so Marilyn Monroe, as she's on the stage dressed as different people. She is weaving a tapestry of Helena of Troy, and Carson kind of interweaves their lives and the dangers of beauty. This play doesn't only compare Marilyn Monroe to Helena of Troy, but also Hollywood to Troy. She does that in a way that she's not really like comparing them, but she is infusing them in a way that people from Marilyn's life suddenly move within a Trojan setting, and it is done so beautifully. I think the way Anne Carson can. If you've read Autobiography of Red, I think you kind of know what to expect from this. It is strange, it is beautiful, and it's vague, and I love it. This I also gave 4 stars. I lied because I also read Essays in Verse, but that's, I guess, non-fiction. I don't know, not really. It doesn't feel like non-fiction at all, but this is a classic, and that is The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. This is about a man, the prophet, who is preaching to a group of people about all the subjects of life. These kind of vignettes, I think you would call them, and every vignette is about a different subject. There are themes throughout it, and I think the thing that stands out is that this prophet kind of presents itself as a religious figure, but the thing that he is preaching aren't religious but general meditations on life. Some themes that I saw that I enjoyed were individualism versus the collective, religion and reason, and birth and death. So it really goes on the big themes of life, but also the more smaller ones, the way that people live, the way that people love, which maybe it's not the smaller ones, but they may feel a bit smaller when you're reading them. This was such a beautiful roundup reading experience because everything that could like matter in life is discussed in this tiny book, and the writing is so beautiful and lyrical and easier to follow than I thought it would be. I definitely want to read more by the author because the writing is just absolutely gorgeous. Another classic I read is Voyage in the Dark by Jean Rhys. This was written in 1934, and we are set a bit earlier, I think 2 decades earlier, in London, and we follow the 18-year-old Anna, who moved there after her family has lived overseas for a long time. She's alone, she doesn't have much of a support system. She has an aunt who is responsible for her. That aunt doesn't take care of her at all. She's a chores girl, which is not very respectable in her society, but it's kind of okay-ish. But then she gets in some financial difficulty and she relies on different lovers to help her survive financially. But she is in a community of women who all do that, and then her reputation in the eyes of her family that she has left, really lowers, and she cannot depend on them at all anymore. I thought it was a very unique perspective. I thought it was beautiful to see Anna struggle through all these things. It's kind of tragic. It's a lot about mental health. We see Anna go through different bad spells of depression. The writing, on the other hand, I love the writing in White Circles of Sea, which is a work Jean Rhys wrote in the 60s, but this felt a little bit unfinished. I wasn't that in love with the stream of consciousness and how it was written in this book, but still something I would recommend if you're interested in the topic. But if you want to read a Jean Rhys, I would say go for White Circles of Sea. I gave this a 3.75. And then finally I read 3 non-fictions. So let's start with one I didn't really love, and that is Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire. This is about Oliver, who works in a rare bookstore, and he talks about his day-to-day life at the bookstore. Expected a memoir, but I got a little bit more of a guide what it's like to work there and things that you need to know, which wasn't all of interest to me. Like, some parts I liked way better than others. The book felt a little bit dense to me for the way that it is marketed. But I think if this is a very specific interest of yours, you will really enjoy it. The more memoir parts, the more personal parts I really enjoyed. I would want to read something else by the author, but I think I gave this a 3 star. My favorite non-fiction of the 3 is Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body by Rebecca Tolsik. This is a memoir that combines life experiences with more general views on disability, which I really loved. It's a great exploration of being disabled in a world that is not built for disabled people. I really enjoyed the way that Rebecca was incredibly vulnerable and open about her life, about her growing up, and about just who she is as a person, the relationships that she has had. And then she goes on to connect those life experiences with more general topics of ableism, of what it is like to live in a disabled body, which I could not always, but at points really connect and identify with. And that was a unique experience, I think, for me as a disabled woman to read a memoir and read things that I have not that actively thought about and connected to myself, but that do apply to me. So this was a experience that I had not had before, and I think the writing and narration of Rebecca Tolsik in this book is absolutely awesome. She does such an amazing job. This was published in 2020. I have no idea if Rebecca Tolsik is planning to write anything else, but if she is, then I'm on it. The final book is an essay collection called It Came From The Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror. These are 26 essays of authors writing about one or two horror films and how they connect that to their queer identity. So I really loved the memoir parts in this. Some essays were so beautifully vulnerable. I think it's like a theme with me in nonfiction when something, especially memoir parts, are incredibly vulnerable and honest. I love it. I admire it so much, even when sometimes it feels like it's almost too much, like someone is almost oversharing, but they do it in such a clever, intelligent way and connect it to, in this case, nerdy bits and horror bits, which my vibe. Loved it. The writing was very different for me because of course these were written by 26 different people, so some of them the writing I loved and others I didn't like at all, so my rating of every single essay is all over the place, but this came to a 4-star for me in the end. Alright, so those were all the 16 books I read in September, and I had an awesome reading month. At points a little bit stressful because I'm getting used to making the vlogs the way that I do. September should be a bit more of a traditional reading month for me. I'm combining Victorian classics, of course, for Victober with spooky reads. I've already started that and I'm having a great time. If you enjoyed this video, then let me know in a comment down below how many books you read in September. Even if it's just one, I want to know and give me the title. I hope that you have a lovely, lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!